What's up, my fellow Stulosphers, Stu for Stulosophy, the Drunken Philosopher here. Well, Dr. Lyle, an actual astrophysicist, a scientist, has some great news for us. This is it, guys. The one thing that a lot of atheists have been asking for. The absolute one best evidence for the existence of God. At long last, we can be done with this silly dance of God exists. No, he doesn't. Yes, he does. No, he doesn't. And us foolish atheists can finally fall in line and be saved and help contribute to the establishment of a Christian theocracy in preparation for our Lord's return, which is due to happen any second now. So the timing couldn't be more perfect.
What is the best argument for the existence of God?
Whew, man, my heart is racing. I'm really excited. All right, let's do this. Give me what you got.
Well, the best evidence for the existence of God is that without God, you couldn't prove that anything existed. You couldn't prove anything at all, in fact. Now, there are many lines of evidence that people sometimes use to demonstrate the existence of God, or at least to confirm the existence of God, and I don't want to minimize any of those. Certainly, it's the case that the intricacies of a living cell certainly confirm God's existence. The majesty of the solar system confirms God's existence.
Well, at the very least, it's certainly the case that you seem to be using the word certainly rather freely there. Your observation regarding the intricacy of the cell, for example. Would it be logical to assume that finding the cell to be intricately structured evidences anything nearly as grand as the existence of a magical being imbued with properties that fly in the face of all of observed reality? Or might we rather gather little more than that you find the cell to be intricately structured? Stating that you find the solar system to be majestic only provides evidence that you find the solar system to be majestic. So far, all you've done is make proclamations that things are true without providing any evidence to the truth of those proclamations.
Even the effects of God in people's lives certainly are confirmation of God's existence.
God's effects in people's lives would certainly be evidence of God's existence, if you are able to show that the effects you attribute to God are indeed because of God.
But it turns out that most arguments that people use for the existence of God are not 100% conclusive.
Hold on! Jimmy, hold on a minute, Jimmy!
Without God, you couldn't prove anything at all.
Arguments for the existence of God are not conclusive.
Despite the fact that Dr. Lyle seems to have metaphorically slammed into the gate before it's even opened and broken all his legs, let's go ahead and hear him out. You never know. Jesus might come down in a hail of divinity and heal all his legs and give him the strength to speed to the finish and wrapping it all up, blowing our atheist minds at the last minute.
You see, in order to prove things, we need laws of logic. What are laws of logic?
Oh wait, you know what? I actually know this because I've taken an introductory course to logic, and I just so happen to have my textbook right here. So let's see what an actual logician says about what logic is. Logic is the study of reasoning and the evaluation of arguments. Huh, well that's perfect, being that your absolute best evidence for God is an argument.
Laws of logic are the chain of reasoning that we use, the correct chain of reasoning, to come to various conclusions from certain premises, certain givens.
Now this is an important part of logic. In the evaluation of arguments, logical validity isn't concerned with the truth or falsity of the statements. It's only concerned with whether or not the conclusion naturally follows given the premises. The argument that God exists because logic exists and logic can't exist without God is in fact a logically valid argument. But it's only logically sound if the premises are true. From a logical standpoint, the conclusion can't be accepted as true unless the premises are shown to be true. Something that you haven't even attempted to demonstrate.
And you see, we all know about laws of logic, and we use them every day. Even if we can't recite them, we all know them instinctively. You can't have A and not A at the same time in the same relationship, what we call the law of non-contradiction. Now, everyone uses that principle. It's very commonly known. And yet, you see that these laws of logic would not make sense in an atheistic universe.
But why?
Why would we have these laws at all without a lawgiver? Why would the universe feel compelled to obey laws of logic if there's no God who's upholding the universe?
Let me see if I have this right. Because a cat cannot be both a cat and not a cat at the same time, this proves God's existence?
You see, laws of logic in the Christian worldview make sense. They're a reflection of the way God thinks.
Oh yes, of course, because the Christian God is so logical. I mean, this amalgamation of conflicting stories and doctrines certainly shows that only the most logical and rational of beings inspired its writings, doesn't it? Actually, this one's a little bit worse than normal because it's not just the Bible.
And so we have these laws of logic that apply everywhere. They're universal. They don't change with time. And that makes sense because God, you see, upholds the entire universe everywhere, and God does not change with time.
Okay, if you're saying the Christian God doesn't change with time, then you and I have very different ideas of what it means to not change with time.
And so that is reflected in the way he thinks about things. And we can, in a sense, think like God, not completely, of course, but we can think in a way that is consistent with his nature because we are made in the image of God.
You know, maybe God, being the super rational being that he is, could have, I don't know, maybe realized that having all that hair in his ass isn't such a good idea and not very conducive to cleanliness, and maybe not have given it to us, even though it's part of his image.
And so we have access to these laws of logic by which we reason. Laws of nature would be another example of something that only makes sense if you take God's existence as something that is factually true. Why would we have laws of nature that the universe feels compelled to obey? Why do these laws have mathematical properties to them like E equals mc squared and F equals ma? Why is it they can be described by these simple equations that the human mind can understand?
Because humans are the ones who invented the way in which we describe things. Why in the world would we create a way to describe things that makes no sense to us? How would we even know whether the descriptions we came up with were accurate if we can't make any sense of them?
Well, that makes sense in the biblical worldview where God has imposed a certain amount of order on the universe. God has made our minds and he upholds the universe in a logical way that we can understand.
First, you say that the existence of logic is proof of God. Now you're saying that existence being able to be described using math is also proof of God. Do you not realize that logic and math are the creations of humans? The humans who wrote the Bible sure as hell weren't doing calculus. Calculus didn't even exist until Newton invented it. Calculus was invented by humans. Maybe that's why it makes sense to us. Do you think that Coco the gorilla, who has an estimated IQ of 70 or so, could ever understand calculus? Of course not, because the gorilla's intellect is limited and it doesn't have the ability to comprehend calculus. Just because we're the most intelligent animal on the planet, at least by our own measure of intelligence, it doesn't mean that our intellect is unlimited. And because our intellect is limited, and we know that, not being able to comprehend or understand something is in no way evidence that a magical God exists. In fact, it seems to me that it's the limitation of our intellect that causes humans to continue to cling to this absurd magical worldview.
Laws of morality would be another example of something that really doesn't make any sense in an evolutionary atheistic universe. Why is it that we ought to behave in a certain fashion if we're just evolved animals, if the universe is just an accident?
Well, what is it that you want? Whatever it is, there are certain things that are necessary for you to do in order to get it. So why ought we to behave in a certain way? Well, it's by behaving that way that we get the things that we want. I want to be happy. I want to be loved. I want to be liked. I have a need for social interaction. I have a need to be around other people and interact. And my life's experiences have led me to understand that being a gigantic asshole and piece of shit to other people doesn't lead me to those things.
Why not make up our own laws?
Make up our own laws. Gee, I wonder why nobody's done that already.
And of course, some people do that.
Yeah, like the people of every country on the entire planet. Would you look at all these crazy laws not found in any Christian scripture? Have you noticed the lack of legislation outlawing Red Lobster? Or laws on how we ought to treat our slaves? Or requiring rape victims to marry their attacker? Or the killing of brides if they happen to show up on their wedding day not a virgin?
And they go to jail for making up some laws that perhaps other people would say are not so good. After all, somebody might think that it's okay for him to kill someone else, but that doesn't really make it right, does it?
Whether something is right or not is subjective. I think it's right to eat shellfish and swine because I think they taste so good. But is it right to kill a sentient animal for food? There's a lot of disagreement on this. Many vegans feel that it's not right to kill sentient animals, and so the vegan might say that they ought not to eat animals. Why might they do that? Maybe because by eating meat and realizing that they've taken the life of a sentient animal, they feel guilt and shame, as well as other emotionally hurtful things when they realize that they are the cause of the death of a sentient animal, when we have plenty of other ways to derive the energy that we need in order to sustain ourselves. Maybe a lot of humans prefer to not feel emotional pain, and so that's why they don't go out killing other people. Maybe the invented laws that us humans created act as some sort of deterrent that leads one to think that maybe they ought not to kill someone, even though they really want to. Morality isn't subjective. Why does every country have different laws? Why are there thousands of different religions, all with their own set of supposedly God-given morality? Why are there over 40,000 sects of Christianity, none of which declare God's morality to be the same? If there is a source of objective morality, why doesn't everybody see it and all agree with it?
You see, in the Christian worldview, laws of morality make sense, because after all, there is a God who made us in His image.
There's a God. You keep saying that, and I keep waiting for you to demonstrate the truth of that statement. Your argument relies on the existence of logic and your ability to be logical, and yet you continue to be illogical.
We're responsible to that God for our actions.
Why? Why are we responsible to God for our actions? Is it because God is so insecure and petty that He had to create humans in order to bully around and force into complying with His every whim on the threat of eternal torture?
And so morality stems from a Christian worldview. It makes sense in light of the biblical God.
It makes sense if one presupposes that your God exists. Maybe no one told you, but presupposing the existence of the thing you're trying to prove is neither proof nor logical.
In a way, the existence of God is the easiest thing in the world to prove.
Well, please do then. This is what we've been waiting for.
Because you see, it's something that everyone already knows. The Bible tells us in Romans 1 that everyone knows in his heart of hearts the biblical God.
And Captain Kirk asked, why does God need a starship?
Because God has made Himself manifest to everyone. God has shown Himself to everyone in the creation, in our conscience, and so on. And so we don't have to go around and try to come up with some new argument. No, people already know God. That's not the problem. The problem is not that people don't have enough evidence for God's existence. The problem, according to Scripture, is that people suppress that truth in unrighteousness. That's what Romans 1 tells us.
God exists and everyone knows it. Therefore, God exists and everyone knows it. There's something familiar about the format of that argument. Let's see here. Here we are. Logical fallacies. Begging the question, circular argumentation, assuming the conclusion in the premises. Dr. Lyle, your argument that God exists because logic exists is turning out to be full of logical fallacies. And you know, strangely enough, of all the tribes we've discovered who have been isolated for thousands of years from the rest of modern humanity, do you know how many of them already knew about Jesus before we discovered them? I'll give you a hint. It's less than one. Or will he persist with the claim that each and every one of them actually do know, but are simply suppressing the knowledge?
What is known of God is made manifest in them. God has showed it to them, and yet they suppress that truth in unrighteousness because they don't want to believe in a God who is rightly angry at them for their sin, for their rebellion against Him. And so you see, what our job is to show people that they're being inconsistent. On the one hand, they're relying upon things like logic and science and morality, things that only make sense in a Christian worldview, while simultaneously denying the God that makes that worldview possible.
All right, that's the end of Dr. Lyle's video and the supposed best, strongest evidence for the existence of God. Let's go ahead and break it down real quick here. First, he declares that the existence of logic itself is the strongest evidence for God. Then he goes on to declare that perceptions of intricacy and majesty are further certain proofs of God. But as we all know, simply proclaiming a thing to be true is not evidence that it's actually true, rather only evidence that the proclaimer believes it to be true. Your proclamations of intricacy and majesty, that the premises for your argument are givens that shouldn't be evaluated for truth or falsity, that you can't comprehend certain things existing without God having created them, that you have to presuppose the existence of God to explain why God exists, all tells me that because you don't understand why a particular thing is intricate, or why you feel a sense of majesty when witnessing a particular thing, or that logic exists and the universe follows a natural order without an order giver. Like a lot of other believers do, you simply throw your arms up in the air and accept the explanation that confirms your bias that God exists, despite the preposterousness of that claim. That is to say, you're arguing that your own personal incredulity is evidence of God. Logicians, you know, the people who study logic for a living and actually understand it, would call your argument from incredulity a fallacy, which is just the fancy logician way of saying you're being illogical. So you see, if your God exists and created logic, then he created the very thing that proves your number one absolute best argument for his existence to be utterly illogical and completely ineffective evidence for God to any rational thinker. And so once again, there we have an argument for the existence of God, and my counter argument as to why that argument is not so good. Who do you guys think made the better argument? Let me know in the comments down below, and until next time, continue to be skeptical about the claims of religion and philosophy on, my fellow stoolosophers.